Iroh is an amazing character in Avatar, and throughout the show you see how influential he is and how he guides Zuko, and near the end also a bit of Aang, but he's just one of those sensei characters that are much older and wiser than the rest. You know, the ones who give advice to the main characters, all the while having an interesting backstory with examples being Yoda, Master Oogway, and Mr. Miyagi, and Splinter. But going back to Iroh, there's one pivotal moment that could change everything in Avatar, and that's if Iroh became the Fire Lord. It's interesting to think about, but for this to work, it has to start during the 600-day siege of Ba Sing Se. In the main timeline, the catalyst that drives Iroh into becoming who he is his son's Lu Ten's death. So let's say Lu Ten doesn't die. In the original timeline, Lu Ten died during the siege, and if that doesn't happen, Iroh wouldn't give up the siege and would press onward. He would manage to get through the walls, but the Dai Li and Earthbenders would try to stop him. Long Feng might be shitting bricks, but I feel like Iroh and the Fire Nation would break through and be able to take Ba Sing Se. Long Feng might try to send the Dai Li to assassinate Iroh, but I mean, bro was a whole general in the Dragon of the West, so yeah, he's beating them. The Earth King would learn about all of this, but there's not much he could do, and this would be the beginning of the downfall of the Earth Kingdom. Also, at this time, Iroh wasn't part of the White Lotus. That was after his son's death, so with Ba Sing Se falling, word would spread around the world and Iroh would be labeled a hero to the Fire Nation. Upon his return, I feel that Fire Lord Azulon, who is old as fuck, would see his firstborn son and recognize it was his time to rule. He would step down as Fire Lord and Iroh would become the new Fire Lord. Lu Ten would become Prince of the Fire Nation and the next in line for the throne, but the one person that would be furious is Ozai. He would definitely start plotting to ensure that Iroh and Lu Ten die or something like that so he could become Fire Lord, and over the next few years, Ozai would plan a coup to usurp his older brother. Zuko would never be banished and he wouldn't be scarred, so his entire personality would be different. He would greatly respect his uncle and idolize his older cousin Lu Ten, and I feel that they would definitely have a strong bond, definitely like an older brother, little brother sort of thing. But all of Ozai's shenanigans would cause discourse in the Fire Nation and might even lead to a civil war, but I think Iroh would catch wind of what his little brother was trying to do. Azula would have probably died of old age by this point, but Ozai would manipulate Azula into joining his side, but I think all of Ozai's planning would come to a stop as I feel Ursa, in order to protect Zuko and Azula, would tell Iroh about Ozai. When Iroh finds out, he would confront Ozai and he would reveal everything, but he would get Azula to attack her uncle, but Lu Ten and Zuko would step in and fight Azula, who at this point would just be like a year or two younger than originally. They would defeat her, but Ozai would challenge Iroh to an Agni Kai for the throne, and the fight between Fire Nation brothers would be really good, but I think Iroh would come out on top as he's just more skilled and experienced. But Ozai would do Ozai things, and if Iroh wins, he might let his little brother live at first, but as soon as Iroh turns around, he would definitely try to fucking shoot lightning at him. And in this timeline, Iroh would have enough, and he isn't good, and he would definitely most likely kill Ozai. So with Ozai's death, Azula would be imprisoned, but eventually Zuko and the rest of the royal family would get through to her, and she would see that her father just used her. And the Fire Nation would return to normal and see that Ozai just wanted power, and Iroh would use this as propaganda to take the rest of the world for the Fire Nation. But during this time, Katara and Sokka would find Aang and start their journey to head to the North Pole. Word would spread that the Avatar had returned, and Iroh hearing this would definitely be interested, but I think he might send Zuko and Azula to find and capture Aang, and Aang along the way would meet up with King Bumi and go on other crazy adventures like in Season 1, but Iroh would plan to take Omashu in the North Pole. Zuko and Azula working together would be a crazy duo, but I feel like that they would come close to capturing Aang. Zhao would also be up to some shenanigans and he would try to worm his way to the top like normal. But it's once Aang gets to the North Pole that things change. Iroh would send a fleet to the North Pole with Lu Ten leading it, and Zhao would somehow find a way to get there, but at the same time, Iroh might personally go to Omashu, and with him leading, he would fight King Bumi. And I don't think King Bumi would surrender like he normally did in the original timeline, so Iroh versus Bumi would be a badass fight, but I think Bumi would probably have the edge at the beginning, like bending buildings and shit at the Fire Lord, but Iroh would have more raw stamina, and I feel Bumi's age would catch up to him quicker, and maybe with some lightning generation, Iroh would come out on top. Aang would learn waterbending with Katara like normal, but also Lu Ten would definitely be pretty strong as I feel he would inherit a lot from Iroh, but I think Lu Ten would learn about Zhao's plan and would try and stop him. But Zhao would backstab him and betray him, catching Lu Ten off guard trying to kill him, but Lu Ten would survive and Zhao would get away and go to kill the Moon Spirit. Sokka would be protecting Yue and he'd be with Aang, Yue, and Katara in the Spirit Garden, but Zuko and Azula would have snuck into the north and would try and capture Aang but would be stopped by Katara. Meanwhile, Zhao would sneak into the garden also while Aang was meditating and in the spirit world. I feel in this timeline Roku would definitely warn Aang about Iroh. Katara might have the upper hand for a bit since it's a full moon, but once the sun rose, Zuko and Azula would be too much for her, and honestly, Katara might die here. Meanwhile, Lu Ten would catch up to Zhao, but just as Aang was about to be captured, Aang comes out of the spirit world and sees Katara's corpse and would go crazy. He'd go into the Avatar state and dogwalk Azula and Zuko, and they would just barely manage to escape. Lu Ten would threaten Zhao to stop it, but just as he did, he would kill the moon spirit just as Aang goes into the Avatar state, and Aang would merge with the ocean spirit and go on a rampage against the Fire Nation, killing Zhao in the process and injuring Lu Ten. Lu Ten would call for a ceasefire, and Yue would tell him and Sokka that she could turn into the moon spirit, and does so just like in the OG timeline. The ocean spirit would calm down and would return to be with the moon spirit, but with Aang knocked out in the process. But Lu Ten would see this as an opportunity and catch Sokka off guard, and the Fire Nation prince might kill Sokka here. Zuko and Azula would meet up with their cousin, and even though there were heavy losses on both sides, Lu Ten would order the Fire Nation to restart the attack, and I feel Iroh would send some reinforcements because unlike Ozai, Bro still loves his son, and the Northern Water Tribe would be defeated. Aang would be imprisoned just so he doesn't die and reincarnate, and I feel that Iroh would put him into a special prison to ensure that he couldn't escape, even if he does go into the Avatar state. At this point, Aang had only mastered airbending and is only decent at waterbending, and I feel with seeing Katara's dead body and learning of Sokka's death, it would break Aang mentally and emotionally, and since Bro is 12, he might just give up here. Even with his past lies telling him not to give up, it wouldn't look good. The White Lotus might try to free Aang, but I feel since Iroh is Fire Lord, he would have figured something like that would exist, and it would create precautions so that doesn't happen. Iroh and Aang would have some deep conversations, and they would grow to understand one another. Aang would have tried to escape many times, but all would be unsuccessful. The only time he might have a chance is during the eclipse, but even then, I feel like he'd be outnumbered and confronted by the entire royal family, as well as thousands of Fire Nation soldiers. He would surrender again, and instead of fighting, he would try to talk to Iroh and get him to see the error of his ways, but since Lu Ten is still alive, that's not really happening. Iroh would use Sozin's Comet and defeat any remaining resistance in the Earth Kingdom and fully take over the world. Iroh would be a fair ruler, and I think honestly people outside the Fire Nation might eventually come to accept and respect him as Fire Lord. I think when Iroh is basically won, he would step down as Fire Lord and Lu Ten would become the next Fire Lord. Zuko and Azula would be given their own places to rule, like one might get Ba Sing Se, while one got Amashu or some other major location. Aang would be broken and would pretty much give up. Iroh on the other hand would travel the world and seeing everything he had accomplished, and Bro pretty much just wins at the end. This all just hinges on the fact that Katara and Sokka both die and Aang is captured. But Iroh is a very smart man and tactician, and he would come out on top, but it could go in a lot of directions. But the major things I see happening are Lu Ten staying alive, Ba Sing Se falling, and Ozai trying to usurp power. But everything with Aang could go in a lot of directions, but that's just a fun route that I think it could go in. But what do you think? Will this happen, or will this timeline take an entirely different route? Let me know down below. But if you enjoyed the video, then be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to see more from me, then be sure to go check out my other channels and go follow me on TikTok, which will all be linked down below. But with all that out of the way, I will catch you all in the next one. Peace